Creating a budget that's realistic and simple to follow doesn't have to be mission impossible. In this video, we're going to teach you how to create a monthly budget that reflects your actual expenses and your real spending habits. By the time we're done, you'll have a convenient calendar that you can use to make all of your daily spending decisions for you. I'm Stacy from Keeping Up with the Changs, and in this 3-part video series, we're going to show you all of our best tips on how to budget and save in ways that actually stick for the long term. For most people, budgets are kind of like brown rice. You know it's good for you, but it doesn't mean you're a fan. Budgeting means spreadsheets that feel like such a chore, irritating restrictions that are tough to follow, and a lot of work for something that results in more frustration than it does savings. In this video, we want to scratch all that and teach you a way to budget that will stick and help you save money. With our budgeting system, you'll end up with an easy-to-follow calendar that you can use as a daily spending guide to take some of the discipline and headache out of managing your daily finances. In this second part of our 3-part video series, we'll provide step-by-step instructions on how to create a simple monthly budget calendar. Later, in part 3, we'll show you how to springboard off of it to create goals for yourself so you can crush it financially. Before we get started, you will need your expense tracking calendars that you've been keeping for the last 3 months. If you haven't done any expense tracking yet, be sure to watch part 1 of our series for a simple tutorial on how to track your expenses. Doing this expense tracking thing is super important for creating a budget that's both doable and realistic for you, so don't try to cut this corner. Again, it's best to have at least 3 months of expense tracking under your belt before continuing on to the next steps in this video. When budgeting, we prefer to use a calendar over a spreadsheet. That's because 1, spreadsheets feel kind of stifling. 2, calendars are easier to read and follow than a spreadsheet. And 3, knowing when and how often you spend is way more helpful for helping you understand and change your behavior. There are 3 basic things you're going to include on your budget calendar. 1, the income you receive. 2, how much you spend on your basic necessities. And 3, an allowance for some fun money. Let's start with the easiest part, your income. Fill in when you expect to get paid and how much you should be receiving each paycheck. Since we'll later be adding your expenses to the same calendar, I like to make the income stand out by using a different color, like red or green. If you're a salaried worker, your income's pretty predictable, so filling in your income should be a cinch. If your income does vary a little bit, then use your best judgment and put down the minimum amount you should receive each paycheck. If your income does vary greatly, like you work for tips or commissions, then you might have a tiny bit more homework than everyone else. During your 3 months of expense tracking, also take note of your exact pay when you receive it. Having that info will help you come up with a good, educated guess when it comes time to do your budget calendar. When in doubt, always use the most conservative figure when estimating your income. Also, if you have consistent, regular other sources of money, like Social Security, feel free to include those on your budget, but only if it's money you can pretty much always count on. After putting down your income, we're going to incorporate what you pay for your basic essentials, which are the expenses that fall into these 7 categories: housing and utilities, groceries, transportation, healthcare, childcare and pet care, minimum debt payments, and an other category, which is reserved for any other unavoidable expenses that don't quite fit into the first 6 categories. Now, this is the part where most budgets fail, when people try to predict their own spending. We're pretty terrible at remembering our real expenses, and we tend to spend a lot more than we think we do. And because our memories have got it all wrong, people tend to set their spending limits too low to be realistic and go through their budgeted amount a lot faster than they thought they would. Which is exactly why we had you track your expenses first, because you should base your budget on what you actually spend, not what you think you spend. Going through all 3 months that you tracked, you're going to look through every single expense and account for it on your budget if it makes sense to. As you're going through each expense, you want to ask yourself 3 key questions. Is this an expense that I have every month? How often do I have this expense each month? And how much do I spend each time I have this expense? Now, I know this sounds like a lot of work, but I promise, once you get started, it's not that bad. So let's go through some examples and show you how it works. The first essentials category is housing and utilities, so we'll only focus on those expenses for now. The first expense we have within this category is electricity. Going through the 3 key questions, yes, this is an expense you have every month. You only pay it one time per month. And across the 3 months, let's say your tracking shows that it costs you anywhere between $100 and $150 per month. Because it's an expense you have every month, that's how you know that it needs to go on your budget calendar. You only need one entry because you pay it only one time a month, and you have a good idea of how much this expense actually costs you thanks to the expense tracking. Make the entry for your electricity bill in your budget calendar on or around the date you usually pay it. For the dollar amount, I recommend being conservative and using the highest of the 3 months, unless there's an obvious explanation why any of the months were exceptionally high and you know it won't happen again. Continue filling out your budget calendar with the rest of your housing and utilities expenses. On your original tracking calendars, cross out each expense as you address them on your budget, just to make sure you don't miss or duplicate anything on accident. As you do this, you'll slowly come to realize that budgeting isn't an exact science. You will need to use some judgment to figure out the right dollar amount and date to enter your various entries. Now, if this lack of precision bothers you, I do want to point out that pretty much anytime anyone sets a budget, that's what they're doing, guessing. No one has a crystal ball that can tell them the future, so pretty much everyone is just speculating what they're going to spend. What sets a good budget apart from a bad one is that the estimates are realistic and reasonable for your situation. Again, that's why this expense tracking stuff is so important, because it helps you base your budget on your spending patterns and no one else's. Starting with housing and utilities expenses helps ease you into budgeting because you're pretty straightforward. They're only once a month and they don't change a lot in amount from month to month. But eventually, you will get to some expenses that aren't so set in stone, like groceries. So let's do an example of how to budget for those so you can see how it works. In this example, we can see that this person tends to buy groceries roughly once a week and spends between $120 to $180 every time they hit the supermarket. Budgeting is simply about making reasonable predictions, so don't overanalyze things and get yourself caught in analysis paralysis. In this case, you can simply add one grocery entry for every week for an amount within that dollar range. Don't forget to cross the grocery entries off of your original expense tracking calendars once you've accounted for them on your new budget calendar. You're pretty much going to repeat this process for every highlighted expense on your expense tracking calendars until you've crossed them all off. By that point, you'll be nearly done with accounting for all of your essentials on your budget calendar, but there are 2 more pointers that we want to go over. First, one of the essentials categories is minimum debt payments. On your budget calendar, just put down the minimal amount due that'll keep the creditors from blowing up your phone. You should always pay more towards your debt if you can, but we'll cover those extra payments in a separate section called money goals, which we'll talk about later on. Second, there are a couple of tricky expenses that come up only once or twice a year, but they're pretty pricey and you do have to pay them. More specifically, we're talking about car registration, car insurance, and property taxes. To keep these expenses from sneaking up on you, take the total amount due and divide it by 6 or 12 as appropriate. Then be sure to make an entry for them somewhere on your budget calendar. That should cover all of your essential expenses, so that leaves just one more category to talk about. To keep your budget from being a total buzzkill, be sure to add a little fun money. When you first start budgeting, it's easy to get all gung-ho and vow to cut everything out because it means you'll save so much money. But then you'll end up hating life, which is not what we're going for. Truthfully, the cold turkey approach is not something that most people can stick out. If you are one of those rare people who can do it and want to, awesome. But realistically, if that's not you, going extreme does zero good if it just means you'll ultimately give up and go back to the same old after a month or two. The real way to win at budgeting is long-term permanent change. And it's okay if you have to do that in baby steps. There are 2 approaches to figuring out how much fun money to allot yourself: by implementing gradual change or by challenging yourself with a small set amount. The first option takes into account how much you regularly spend now and lets you gradually reduce it month by month. For example, let's say you eat lunch out 5 days a week. On next month's budget, you can just budget going out 4 days a week, which means you only have to bring home lunch 1 day. That's a lot more doable than switching completely to home lunch if you've never done that before. Then, The following month, you can make it lunch out 3 days a week, and so on, month after month, until you're at a level you're happy with. You can actually use this strategy to reduce your spending in pretty much any category, whether it's daily coffees, groceries, or whatever else. Just budget in a similar pattern to how it shows up on your expense tracking calendars, but at a slightly lower frequency or lesser dollar amount, month after month. That way, it never feels like a total lifestyle overhaul. Now, the first option is gentle on your willpower, but the second option gives you a chance to save way more, and it might not be as hard as you think. With option 2, just set a weekly dollar amount and stop spending on non-essentials once you hit that threshold within the week. How low you want to go, and thus how much you want to give yourself the potential to save, is totally up to you. If you're willing to challenge yourself, you can probably get away with a much smaller allowance than you think, especially if you're willing to use a few Jedi mind tricks to maximize the amount of fun you get out of this dollar amount. For starters, give a lot of thought to how you want to use the money, rather than just leaving it generically labeled as fun on your budget. For example, you might want to consider going to the movies or doing an ice cream run. Even if you don't decide right away, the anticipation of being able to partake in at least some of that fun stuff will immediately start making you happy and excited before you've even spent a single penny. Once you do decide how you want to put that fun money to good use, update your calendar entry to the exact activity and move it to the date you want to make it happen. Having something to look forward to on your budget calendar is a surprisingly powerful mood booster and can even make the experience itself better. Another thing you'll notice if you go with a set budget amount is that you'll start to be a lot more selective of how you use your fun money, which is a good thing. The truth is, not all joys are created equal, and there will always be some things that bring you a lot more joy and happiness than others. When you're not paying attention to how you spend, regret becomes an all too common emotion because you eventually realize that you wasted your money on things that didn't make you that happy. But by then, it's too late and the money's gone. On the other hand, if your fun money is something that you think of ahead of time, you naturally select things that maximize your joy to money ratio, and that is fun money well spent. On top of that, the less often that you do or buy something, the more special it feels when you get around to it again. And it's kind of surprising how quickly that sets in once you decide to cut back on something. I knew someone who used to eat out lunch all the time, including at a nearby Chinese restaurant. Eventually, she decided to cut back on eating out, and not long after that, someone treated her to lunch at that restaurant as a thank you. The surprising thing to her was, the experience was completely different and way more enjoyable than all those other times she had eaten there before. The thing is, once we dull ourselves to an experience, we tend to enjoy it a lot less. It's kind of like how people say, absence makes the heart grow fonder. It doesn't just apply to people, it also applies to experiences and things too. You now have a working budget that incorporates your income, your essential expenses, and provides for a little bit of fun money. Now would be the perfect time to check on the health of your spending habits. Add up your income, subtract all of your other entries, and see how much money that leaves you with to put towards your money goals. Write that dollar amount along the side of your calendar. This money goals fund is what you use to achieve your other bigger financial objectives, such as building up an emergency fund, paying off debt, saving for retirement, or even preparing to put a down payment on your very own home. Having money left over at the end of each month is the only way you'll have the means to work towards these bigger goals, which provides you with security and wealth. So you want to get to a point where you do have a healthy amount in your money goals fund at the end of each month. If all of your expenses added together exceeds your income, meaning you don't have any money left at the end of the month and you're actually in the negative, that can be a big red flag. To make up for that shortage, you're probably tapping into your savings or taking on more and more debt. But neither of those solutions can be permanent because you'll eventually run out of savings or stop qualifying for any more credit. To fix this problem, you'll need to either take on another job or reduce what you're spending, even on your basic essentials. Heck, you might even have to do both. I know that's tough to hear, but as much as that news might sting, consider that there's lots of people with incredible comeback stories who are able to get their finances together and dig themselves out of debt. You aren't alone, and if they can do it, so can you. If you could use a little inspiration, click on the link in our video description below and check out the book Slaying the Debt Dragon to read about one family's incredible journey to paying off over $127,000 of debt. Now, what if you're pretty much breaking even between your expenses and your income? Honestly, that's not exactly a good spot to be in either, because it essentially means you're living paycheck to paycheck. All it takes is one unexpected emergency or expense, and you could find yourself dangerously close to experiencing major financial hardship. Getting to a place where you have a healthy amount in your money goals column is a place you want to be, and the heftier that amount, the better. Whatever the dollar amount you're able to put in that column, a daily budget is what helps ensure that you don't inadvertently spend away that money every month. Anytime you're getting ready to spend or pay a bill, compare that expense to your budget. If the expense ends up costing you less than what you budgeted for, sweet. Add the savings to your money goals total. If you end up spending more than you budgeted for, subtract the overage instead. If it's something that wasn't on your budget at all in the first place, but you still decide to go for it, that too would be a subtraction from the money goals amount. A budget doesn't have to be a jail sentence, so we're not trying to say you have to ban all spending that isn't on your budget. We just want you to think before you make a money move, because you don't want to fall back into the same old pattern where you spend carelessly or mindlessly and then later regret your decision when it's already too late. The honest truth is that all spending is a trade-off. It's just that our brains are too busy or too tired to really think about the ramifications of our spending decisions every single time. So using a budget calendar and subtracting the amount from your money goals amount before you make the spend helps you really hone in and think about whether the spend is worth it or not worth it to you. As for all your spending that is on the budget calendar but simply comes out over or under, keeping track helps you see if you're consistently budgeting too much or too little for that expense. Although most people will use the same amounts and budget entries month after month after month, we still recommend that you keep your historical budgets and results in a binder so that you can check in every so often and make any tweaks if necessary. For people who have very variable income or really seasonal spending patterns, this budget history will be especially helpful. Speaking of income, don't forget to account for variations in that as well. If you bring in more income than you accounted for on your budget, pat yourself on the back, then add the extra income to your money goals total. On the other hand, if your paycheck fell short, subtract the difference from the money goals total instead. The more income you can bring in and the better you can manage your spending, the higher you can bump up that money goals number, which ultimately means more cash to throw at your big financial goals. If you want more help and ideas on how to save, great news. We've got one more video in this video series that'll teach you how to do just that. In the final video of this 3-part series, we'll show you the most effective money-saving techniques, including how to use this budget calendar daily, that'll give you the best results for the least amount of mental effort. So now you know how to create a solid monthly budget calendar that's 100% doable for you. If you liked what you saw, we'd love to get a thumbs up and hear your feedback in the comments below. Don't forget to also subscribe to our YouTube channel or like us on Facebook to hear more of our unique take on money and happiness. And remember to share the wealth with your friends and family by letting them know about this free budgeting tutorial so they can get their finances under control too. I'm Stacy from Keeping Up with the Changs. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you in part 3 of this video series. Cheers. Do I have to do that? I forgot. Okay. Truthfully, the cold turkey approach isn't something that most people... Just use the same frequency as your expense tracking calendars. Oh no, there's a fly in my face. Or doing an ice cream run. Even if you don't, it's okay, I'll do this. And can even make the experience itself better. I did it!